man. That's how I got crabs.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. That's the last time I go down to Bermuda, man.
Jesus. Was Superman there?
Yeah, actually, I just missed him. You know, he was moving, and he decided I can't help people today. I got to move.
Thank God you didn't give him crabs, because they'd just be super crabs.
Who says I didn't?
Ooh.
And welcome to the Ludic Loungecast, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else. I am one half of your delightful co-hosts, John Soares, and with me, as always, delightfully surprised, as he always is, the man, the myth, the booty, the legend himself, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV. Bid a fond good evening to our gentle listeners, Anthony.
A fond good evening to all our gentle listeners, all 6 of you.
Yeah, stealing a little bit of the Columbo thunder for the Loungecast.
A little bit.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite, I think, honestly, one of the series that still keeps me reading, because I'm not an avid reader such as yourself, John, but this series by itself is one of those series that I will continue to still vest time into reading because I enjoy this series so much.
Agreed, Anthony. And the series that Anthony is so lovingly referring to is Jim Butcher's urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy mystery novel series, The Dresden Files, which is a first-person perspective story of private investigator and wizard Harry Dresden. I'm not going to say his full name because that would seem disrespectful to a proper wizard like Harry, because you don't want to put your full name out there and give it power.
Absolutely.
So the Dresden Files are akin to a Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe-esque style hard-boiled detective novel.
100%. 100%.
But with a twist, Anthony. And you know what that twist is?
It's a spooky.
It's a spooky, and he's a magic. I don't know why I did this voice, but he's a spooky.
So essentially, ladies, gentlemen, and fine folk in and all in between, one of the blurbs, there's a blurb on the very first book of the Jim Butcher series, Dresden Files, that pretty much sums it up, and I'm going to read it real quick. It's, Harry Dresden is best at what he does. Well, technically, he's the only one that does what he does. So when the Chicago PD has a case that transcends mortal creativity or capability, they come to him for answers. For the everyday world, it's actually full of strange and magical things, and most of them don't play well with humans. That's where Dresden comes in. Takes a wizard to catch, well, whatever.
And that's about the tone you'd expect from the Dresden Files. It does verge on the smart-assy and the funny, but it has honestly one of the best beating hearts in a long-form series that I've come across in at least the entirety of my life.
And John, this series in itself is 20 years old. I recently just found out as we were doing some pre-show prep. This first book, Stormfront, that Jim Butcher released, was published in the year 2000. And here we are sitting in the year 2020 with his 2 new books that just dropped, which is why we are doing a little series recap. And by series recap, we're going to gush about over our love of it, maybe throw in some plot points here and there. But folks, there's 15 books so far, not counting the 2 that just released and not counting all of the side novels. So we don't want like a 7-hour show.
And Anthony and I, even though we're younger men, we are old younger men, and our memory is not as good as it was when we were in college.
Absolutely, 100%. And in my case, John, I listened to this series, listening, not reading, mainly through its audiobook format. As I was moving from California to Iowa, from Iowa to California, commuting in California all the way up to the Bay Area for my classes and back down to where I was living. So I had a lot of time to kill, and these audiobooks came in clutch. Now, John, speaking of things that come in clutch and tell us how you got into the Dresden Files.
Well, Anthony, I think a couple years ago, I would have called Jim Butcher's books, and this book in particular, a Walmart book, because I found it at a Walmart, among others.
I love that premise of it. A Walmart book, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's just like one of those things where you just find them like wandering around like a big box store, like a Walmart or a Target, and it just something about the cover catches your attention, and you feel inclined to take it with you out of the store. So I came across the 12th book entitled Changes. And that is
Changes.
Turn and face the strange.
Changes.
You gotta be original. I don't know what the lyric is.
That's okay. I just want to throw that in there because it is Loungecast. Continue.
So I thought it was just like one of those books where you could just jump in without any issues. And then I quickly learned, oh, this is one of many books. So I put aside Changes and I started from the start. And no disrespect to Mr. Butcher, because I think he, on top of many things, world building in particular, because like you said, Anthony, this is as of this April of 2020, this series has been around for 20 years. He's been working on it for 20 years of his life. He's built this world out, albeit it's using a lot of mythology that exists from other fiction, or folklore, like fairies and vampires and werewolves and all that stuff,
like the fae and stuff like that. And he does it actually excellently well, which we'll talk about probably in a little bit.
Yeah. So and this is where I felt the need to kind of dive deeper into those respective mythologies and like, oh, okay, he's referring to this. And then, you do a Google search and find out, oh, it's referring to this legend that's found in this book. So you go read that and fall into a weird Gaelic nest of Irish folklore, or you take a class that puts you into a weird nest of Irish folklore. But that's beside the point. So one of the things that I know about Mr. Butcher's series is that it takes 100 pages to kind of get hooked.
That's fair.
And that's become my barometer when it comes to any type of book. Because when I read Stormfront, the first novel, I wasn't 100% sure if I was willing to go on the ride. It felt like my recollection, and this was maybe 2011, 2012 when I started going back into it.
Something around there, right? Yeah, that sounds about right.
Roughly, give or take. And I felt like that first book was very much just a first book, and it was, stuck in that rut of trying to do world building while also trying to engage you in the characters. There was a lot of juggling, at least for the first 100 pages. And then there was a certain point where it became like in my head, oh, this just got amazing.
Yeah. It just clicks for you. And now, John, on my half of it, because when you were already a few books in when you recommended it to me and recommended the audiobooks. And John, the audiobooks, I'm going to just touch on that a little bit. They're done narrated by James Marsters for all but one.
Yeah, and for those folk at home, and for you Buffy the Vampire Slayer fans out there, James Marsters is best known for his role as Spike in Buffy.
Absolutely.
And one of the blurbs that I think is carried throughout every single cover of this book is the best way to describe the Dresden Files is think Buffy the Vampire Slayer starring Philip Marlowe.
Yeah.
So
100%.
It is a private eye who likes to be a smartass and then gets beat up, but then finds a way to win.
And John, so from while it took you 100 pages in just to get into the series, upon hearing the first audiobook, it had me at the hook because the way James Marsters narrates this, he just puts so much effort and so much time and so much love into every single character he does. And at first you go, oh, so it's a man narrating female parts too. That's kind of weird. I'm expecting more of like an audio drama in my head. But after like not even that much of a time, just because of the little inflections he puts into each character, whether it be male, female, fae, or whatever have you, it instantly brought me into where the point of when I listened to the, subsequential books, listening to Marsters do it, it's like, oh yeah, of course, that's what Murphy would sound like. Oh yeah, of course, that's what this person would sound like. And it had me from the get-go. And that's how I listened to and got through a lot of this series is, again, I mentioned I was commuting to my college and in Bay Area traffic, for those of you who know the Bay Area or live in the Bay Area. even though a place is maybe an hour away, you'll sit in traffic for 3 hours. So
Yeah.
I had a lot of time to listen to these books. And then, of course, driving and moving from California to Iowa, which I did, doing 14-hour days of driving, I got through these books again a second time. So needless to say, I am absolutely in love with the audiobook version of them. And I think I've only personally read one or two of these 15 books so far, actually page for page. But every time I listen to it now, John, I hear Marsters in my head as the titular character, Harry Dresden.
Yeah, he does the same thing that I think Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill do for Batman and the Joker, respectively. Like they come to define the voice of the character for both the initial generation that came across them and subsequent generations, because they're such an embodiment. Now, Anthony, James Marsters didn't do every audiobook. There was one exception. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that was Ghost Story, John. And in Ghost Story, I'm just going to tell you my perspective from it. My perspective from it, John, was that I know you warned me ahead of time that Marsters didn't do this one, but I'm like, it can't be that bad. Like, maybe it's just kind of a knocked off James Marsters, should be fine. But it was a complete 180 from a Marsters type of performance. And it was, I'm trying to look it up right now. Due to scheduling conflicts, Jim Butcher reported that Marsters was unable to voice Ghost Story, and instead the narration was performed by actor John Glover. And boy, John, like I said, when I said it was a 180, it was just I had a hard time getting into the book just listening to it at this point.
And you know what's funny though is that I didn't realize it was John Glover of Smallville fame.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I didn't think about it because I don't see him as John Glover, right? I see him more as, that's Luthor. That's Lex's dad, of course. But it just, I don't know if it's because, like, I think this was book 12.
No, 13, actually.
13, excuse me. Book 13 of the series. So I had 12 books predicated on a certain type of style, certain type of pacing. But boy, it turned me off, honestly.
And if I can add to that, and this might be a little bit long-winded, but it's me. What do you expect? So like every single book is a situational case. Harry gets drawn into one particular event that carries out through the whole of the book. So now the second book, Full Moon, is about FOOL, like a court fool, a jester or whatever. But it's a play on words, and it's just meant to be about werewolves. So the second book deals with werewolves, and that's all it really does. But up to Changes, book 12, it's all kind of building up to, and it's quietly building up to things. Right. And then when you come to Changes, it's such a monumental shift in the pace of the story, what Harry has to deal with, how aggressive he has to be with it for various reasons, the stakes, the cost at the end of it.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, Anthony, I had issues with Ghost Story because it was such a 180 in terms of pace compared to the previous 12 books, because from Stormfront to Changes, every single book felt propulsive. And when I was reading this stuff in college, I would burn through these books.
Yeah, because that's another thing, John. They're not long books at all.
No, they're honestly probably at most, 300 pages, 350 pages.
And that's pushing it too.
And so it's, you can, if you have no distractions, you can get a very, very strong character-based, fantasy mystery within a day. I read one of these start to finish within one day once.
Oh yeah, I believe it, 100%.
And that's just the writing's just delicious. I love it.
It is, honestly,
it's delicious.
The way, John, you mentioned how all these books like start to lead up to something little by little, and that's what gets me about these books is from book one to book all the way up to Changes. you go, okay, there's no towards the end you're like, there's no way that Harry can face anything as even close as huge as he's facing now. And Butcher finds a way in each novel to just up the stakes and up the stakes and up the stakes to where by, like I said, by changes, you're like, holy shit, I didn't realize it can get this big. Because book one, there's some big things that happen, and what I appreciate is Butcher takes the time, and in character, Dresden takes the time to actually tell you, like, I don't know how the fuck I'm going to get out of this. I have no idea how I'm going to get out of this. But then he learns, he grows, he learns, he grows to where by changes, he's facing like literally apocalyptic things that happen.
Yeah. Hordes of vampires.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
in
just
South America.
In South America. And honestly, Changes is probably one of my favorite books of the series. And it's one of my fucking worst books ever because of how my heart breaks.
The end of Changes is such a gut punch from left field that you don't expect coming. And that's why, even though I said I got frustrated just by the nature of the changeover from Marsters to Glover, the pacing of what Harry is doing in Ghost Story, and it's quite literal,
yeah,
for various reasons. It's such a slowdown, and an on purpose slowdown. So I because of that, I give it a little bit more leeway. But it's and my heart broke because the benefit of having this series essentially told to you by the character of Harry Dresden. You get to know Harry. He feels like a fuck up sometimes. He feels frustrated. He feels lonely. He feels afraid. You get everything from him directly. So when you see what happens to him, you feel for the guy because you just want him to have better luck because he puts out so much of himself just to save first Chicago, because that's where the majority of the series still takes place, and for the rest of the world, because he gives, he's willing to just keep fighting because it feels like it's the right thing to do. Honestly, he feels very akin to a Peter Parker to me, to be quite honest.
Yeah, especially Peter Parker working at the Bugle, right? Like, he barely makes any money just to get shit paid for. And on top of that, he's fighting this unknown force. It always that, like, the general population of the world or Chicago can even see. But he's the last thing standing between, a lot of the times, hell on earth. Quite literally, hell in Chicago.
Yeah. Or just like, magical breach of the Fae into the human world, where it's just nobody is ready for that. And nobody could withstand that kind of a change. Now, Anthony, I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
When you think of Harry, how do you picture him? Do you picture him like what he's shown on the cover of the books more often, or do you have a specific image of Harry in your head?
So I have this. It's kind of akin to what we see on the covers, John. I will not lie to you, but I see him as like a 6'2", kind of lanky, jet black hair. Maybe
he's 6'9", though.
Yeah, I know he's taller than that, but in my head he's like 6'3", 6'4", lanky, okay. Not athletic, but still can has some muscle to him. Brown or black jet hair, clean shaven, maybe some stubs. Essentially like Sam Spade, but like 6'4" and a little bit, not as muscular.
So like a taller, buffer Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Now that you mention it,
I'm going to tell you what I think, and you're probably not going to be surprised, but bear with me. I think a 6'9" Bruce Campbell,
like a young Bruce Campbell, though, like circa Evil Dead 2, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can totally see that. 100%.
Because there's just something about Butcher's humor and the way he writes Harry. And there's one moment where there's just like this ham-fisted reference to Evil Dead and Ash where Harry just does a groovy.
Yeah.
Like like Bruce Campbell does in Evil Dead 2, and from that moment, it clicked in my head where I thought, oh, of course it's Bruce Campbell. It can't be anybody but Bruce Campbell.
And you know what? It kind of akin to Ash. He faces a bunch of crap thrown at him. And with this wicked sense of humor, he has to face it down to make sure the world isn't exposed to this fey magic or just this evil magic. Now, John, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Which book would you say, you mentioned 100 pages in, and the first book, you're like, okay, this is great. But which book would you say that you really sunk your teeth into that said, okay, I am loyal to Butcher and where this series goes? Because I have one for you if you need time to think.
Okay. You go, because I got to think.
Okay. So for me, it was Grave Peril, and that was the third book in the series. And that's when Michael Carpenter gets introduced, which is a friend. Yeah, which is a friend of Harry. And essentially, he is a very devout Christian man and has a very devout following to God. And because of that, it's never permanently shown that God is granting him powers, but his faith alone is making him strong enough to face some of the most wicked and evil things in Chicago. And that's when this series really got me, is when they started introducing that, because as past the third book and things that escalate in the third book and beyond, and the theme of, okay, well, is God really playing a role in this world, or is it just the belief of this one man who thinks, and this one man or this small select few people who think that, okay, this faith that makes me literally move mountains to the point where I need to do the better good. And this was at a time for me personally, John, where I was having a huge crisis of my own as far as my own personal beliefs and my own faith. So this really just sunk into me and just really made me kind of contemplate what faith means, because Harry kind of doesn't really give a lot of credence to Michael Carpenter and his family and his devout ways to his religion. And it just, I felt like in this book, it was me, myself, as more of the Dresden side of kind of like, yeah, look, I believe in magic, but Christianity and, you know, belief in God, not so much, because I had a few things happen to me in my personal life with the Catholic Church and all of those things. And so with Michael and his devoutness and the way that escalates and the way Harry understands his faith better, understands his character better, just that constant battle between, is there something there? Is there not something there? What is that? Just really sunk into me on a deep and personal connection, John.
Yeah, that is a fantastic thing to say. Also, I just love the concept of magic swords. I just want to throw that out there.
But magic swords based on faith, John.
And it gets fucking metal, because Michael's sword, if you recall, Anthony, the metal is made from one of the nails that pinned Christ to his crucifix.
Yes, I do remember that. And what I also remember is later in the series where they talk about not just Michael, but essentially the other kind of knights of, I don't remember what their name was, but it was like the Knights of the Lord, essentially.
I think it's
I can't. I'm not going to spend the next 20 minutes looking it up, but essentially there's this group of knights similar to Michael who...
The Knights of the Cross.
Knights of the Cross, thank you. The Knights of the Cross that have the same temperament as Michael, except for one particular character, and I can't remember his name, but I remember that Dresden had a talk with him, and he's like, wait, how are you not as devout as Michael, but you still have power over the sword? He's like, yeah, I'm agnostic as best. I don't necessarily believe that there's quote unquote a God, but I believe that a person can make a difference and can change in the world. And I believe that there is some sort of higher power that's guiding us towards, you know, showing us what's right and wrong and showing us that we need to take care of each other. And that exactly, again, this was not in the third book. This was many books after, John. But again, that just hit me and went, boom. Of course, that makes sense.
No, that's honestly one of the things I love about about this series, and about just the concept of the Knights of the Cross in general. For me, Anthony, I think the book that cemented it was a little bit farther along, but it's I referred to it earlier about the one that I finished just within, started it that morning, finished it later that evening. I believe, if I recall correctly, it was the sixth book, Blood Rights. and that involves Harry dealing with one of the many covens of vampires that end up crossing his path. One of which he's related to, but that's a whole complicated story. But
Yes.
I just
Oh,
remember.
wait. Was this the porn one where he had to
Yes.
like? Yes. Okay, I do remember this.
and trust me, dear listeners, my loyalty is not because he made reference to pornography.
Yeah, it was just
Not
a
that filthy.
weird. It was a weird premise for a plot. Essentially, this porn studio director hires Dresden because some spooky shit's happening on his porn sets,
People keep dying.
and people keep dying. So he's like, there has to be something supernatural here because nothing else explains it. So he hires Dresden to figure out what the hell's going on, and just it escalates from there, and just crazy shit happens.
Yes. And speaking of crazy shit, Anthony, thank you for that wonderful, wonderful setup. What hooked me is how this book opens. And it's Harry and his brother Thomas, who is a type of vampire, not a better kind ish. He's a good person, but that's neither here nor there.
We're trying not to spoil things, folks. We're really not.
Yeah, I know. It's the little things like that we can give you. They save a litter of dogs from demon gorillas.
Yes. What a hell of an opening.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, like they have to escape them from a burning building or something like that. And then you get, because of this, Harry gets one of the best fictional dogs I've ever encountered in my life. Mouse, who is a giant Tibetan temple dog. So Harry gets a magic dog.
Yeah.
And this dog is the most loyal thing in the entire universe and can smell out evil. Yeah. How cool is that, Anthony?
Oh, it's badass. I love that.
That's badass. That
honestly,
is entirely badass.
The cast of characters that Butcher surrounds Dresden with, because at some point Dresden goes from like being alone essentially to being this loner type to little by little gaining more friends and learning more alliances and this and that, to, like I said, to the point where he now has this magical dog, and they're just Harry's world isn't huge as far as his circle of friends or circle of people he can trust, but the people he can trust and the people he always constantly relies on are so deep into their loyalty with Harry, and because they know that Harry, for all his bad things that he does and his bad characteristics, he does mean well, and he does try to actually help the world. And a few times, John, especially I mentioned Michael's character, a few times Michael's family and Michael, they confront Harry about the loyalty that Harry draws on to people and how it leads people to get hurt more often than not, unfortunately.
Yeah. And there's one instance where that really does happen to, I think, arguably Harry's closest friend and confidant, Karen Murphy, who is his police connection. And she is with Harry from the jump. She shows up in Stormfront being very much skeptical on what Harry is and whether he's a wizard or not, to being, I think, the person who believes in him most. And, what I've gone through, peace talks. Anthony, I know, is in the process of it, but she goes through hell, physically, in the later books, because at the end, she's just human. She's by Harry's side. She's never going to leave his side because she trusts him that much and she believes in what he does. And the same goes from Harry to her. But the things that they deal with, there's a cost. There's always a cost. And it's just, I think that just goes back to the rule of magic, or at least I'm stealing a little bit from Full Metal Alchemist, where it's just like, there's a law of equivalent exchange. Even to save things, you have to give up things. And sometimes that means your body. And sometimes that means something else. But that depends on the conversation in that moment, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And again, just Murphy alone is one of the stronger characters of this. I think you can make a series of novels just based off of her character alone. But like as John mentioned, she has no she's not a wizard. She doesn't have any magic fae in her back pocket to help her do things. She's literally just a police cop who knows right from wrong and is trying to make sense of the world and trying to bring justice to an unjust universe or an unjust world, if you will.
Yeah.
And I really like what they do with her character as the series evolves. But she and Dresden, especially in the first few books, they just butt heads like it's nobody's business, man. Like she is still trying to believe that this stuff is possible. And there's a few times where her loyalty to Dresden wavers quite a bit just because of some of the shit Dresden does or has to do in his mind in order to make things right, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But again, one of her key moments, I think, comes in one of the last books I read or I listened to, Skin Game, where it's essentially just it's a bank robber novel set in a magical world, essentially.
It is a magical heist story, and it comes at a point where Harry is now in a predicament with the head fairies of the Fae, where he is essentially a hitman now.
Yeah.
For an evil magical queen, and he is really stuck in a shit situation. Yeah, that's a little bit of a mild spoiler, but it's like that's the kind of stuff that this series has done. It puts Harry up against really, really complicated issues and tries to force him to find a solution. And I'm really curious as to where Butcher is going to take Harry in relation to what he is dealing with when it comes to Queen Mab and his role with the Fae now as this big bad.
Yeah, I don't know where it's gonna go, John. But what I do know is, if you're still listening to us, folks, all 6 of you, 5 of them being my own downloads, is that if you want a series to get into and you really like series such as Supernatural, such as any sort of supernatural kind of a thriller or suspense, either series of books or TV show,
Buffy. Or even Harry Potter to an extent, because you could equate this to it's one Harry to another Harry. This is definitely a more adult experience because there is some sexy times.
I mean, this is not a young adult novel. This is for adults.
And funny enough, looking at some of the publication history, when when Butcher was enrolled in a writing class, his teacher had encouraged him to write a novel similar to Anthony. I hope you remember this, because this is something that would always come up when we were in high school, because teenagers are pervs. The Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series by Laurel K. Hamilton.
Yes, I think I've read quite a few of those too.
And those are some raunchy fantasy detective style, similar ballpark as Dresden, but I think it falls more into
it's like
erotica than
it was during the time where like True Blood was hot. And all of those kind of shows where it was just like, hey, let's sprinkle in a little bit of supernatural as we have people fucking, like, pretty much.
Yeah, that's honestly what it is. So he wrote something within the Anita Blake realm, and this is a quote from him, circa 2004. When I finally got tired of arguing with her and decided to write a novel as if I was some kind of formulaic genre writing drone, just to prove to her how awful it would be, I wrote the first book of the Dresden Files.
God damn it.
Yeah, I know. And then that, he eventually got it accepted for publication, and it's been that way for almost 20 years now. And it got a TV show, Anthony.
Oh, I was hoping we weren't going to talk about that.
I know, but we're going to talk about it for 2 reasons. One, we're doing our due diligence, and 2, there's moderate good news at the end of it. So In 2007, 7 years after the series started, the Sci-Fi Channel, before they went to SYFY, when they were still SCI-FI Channel.
Before the dark times, before the
Empire. There was a TV adaptation of the books. It differed in many ways. A lot of character relationships and character status, whether some people were alive or dead. That was changed. Harry's magic library that lived in a skull, that's a spirit, was more personified instead of just, he has a magic skull named Bob that tells him all of his magic spells.
Think
Bob,
John Cleese, like a dirty-minded John Cleese.
Yeah. Funny enough, I never pictured Bob as sounding like John Cleese.
I always pictured how John Cleese was in as nearly headless Nick in the Harry Potter films.
Yes.
I kind of pictured Bob as that, except he is obviously way more dirty-minded, if you will.
Honestly, I kind of, thinking about it, and considering it's in Chicago, I always thought he sounded like John Belushi.
I can't see that. I'm gonna have to disagree. Hard to disagree.
I mean, we might have to go back to the mats and see what happens and discuss again. But then again, I would just go to the mats anyway because
fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough. So the TV show only lasted one season. It starred actor Paul Blackthorne as Harry Dresden, and for those playing Hollywood Bingo at home, I guess I'm just making this up. Whatever Hollywood Bingo is, Paul Blackthorne is probably better known now for playing the, I guess, Jim Gordon-esque character in the CW show Arrow, where he played the Black Canary's dad.
Yes.
Quentin Lance, if I recall.
I think so. It was something in that regard, right?
Yes, I don't remember. If you CW nuts, you can sue me. I don't care. I only care about those shows when they cross over, and that's about it.
Yeah.
But the show only lasted one season. It had a cult following. I personally have never seen it outside of very small sketches. But good news, Anthony.
Yes.
As of 2018. Fox 21 had optioned the Dresden Files for a new TV show.
And I hope they do it its due diligence and actually make it. I felt like, because I think I watched maybe one or two episodes of the actual sci-fi series, and I felt like they were trying to make it more of like a jokester series. And while there's funny moments in Butcher's series here, it's more of a dark series. It's a lot darker than especially as these novels build up. The mood of it gets darker and darker, akin to like Harry Potter. In the first one, it's all bright lights and everything, and the series, just as it progresses and these characters get older, and the stakes are just rise to unproportional amounts. It just gets darker, and there's more stakes, and everything's bigger. Whereas the show, and maybe they would have gone there, I'm not sure, but the episodes I watch, it was always just kind of like, and here, we'll throw a joke line here and a joke line there. It's like, while that's there, it's not that.
Yeah, it doesn't, it sounds like it just doesn't stroke the same, chords that the novels do.
Yeah.
And I mean, and part of me is afraid that since it was Fox 21 or whatever the hell that is, that option the Dresden Files, that means it's in the hands of Disney now.
Oh, that's right. Jesus.
So, 2 years, and this came about the time where we had a big gap between novels. So the last one we had before this year was Skin Game in 2015, and that was a magical heist, to be brief about it.
Right.
And we just now got, I guess, the Infinity War Endgame combo of Peace Talks and Battleground this year. So for various personal reasons, the short version is that, and this is available online, is that Jim Butcher had a lot of personal issues come up that delayed writing, and he was distracted. He was able to put out short stories and graphic novels, and once he was able to get back into a groove and get some stuff out, and now we're back in full force. Have you read any of the graphic novels, Anthony?
I have not read any of the graphic novels nor the short story collections, because to me, I'd rather have a finished product than like 17 short stories in a book. I've never been one of those that, oh, let me read a collection of, even Sanderson's collection, his Cosmere. I've had a hard time of just sitting and reading each individual story, because I'm the kind of guy who likes to have it all a concise story, kind of like I am with my graphic novels. I don't want to read issue 1 when I could read this entire issue 1 through 20 in one book, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And typically I'm not really the biggest fan of short stories. I've gotten a better appreciation of them as I've gotten older. I would still recommend the Dresden short story collections, of which there are two. They expand on some things here and there. More often than not, they're just small stories that would not really sustain a full novel. Other times they are different perspective pieces. Harry's Apprentice at one point is the lead of one of those stories. And we haven't mentioned Molly Carpenter, for spoiler reasons.
Right.
Molly is Harry's apprentice, and it's a very complicated relationship.
Yes.
For a couple reasons. One of which is just the unrequited obsession on her part towards her mentor, which Harry is very icked out by.
But he squashes that, and then it doesn't really become a thing after he squashes it.
No, yeah, but it's that's one of the things where sometimes it just comes up still, and I just get a little bit like, eh.
Yeah, because I think there's like a 20-something age gap. Your age.
Yeah, she might as well be his like younger sister,
or younger sister, or at that point daughter. And again, it's a weird angle on it, but what I appreciate is that, because oftentimes, people like to fall in love for this type of a person, especially one who is a heroic, who saves the day, who oftentimes tries to do good for the world, and people love that quality in other people, so people fall for that quality. But at some point, people know that they love a quality, but they don't love a person, because that could be a very toxic relationship, especially with different power dynamics, which was what happens in this series. And Dresden does a good job. Once he actually realizes what's going on there, he does a really great job of squashing that and saying, look, we're not here to have anything. You are here to be my apprentice. You will learn magic from me. But anything other than that, you're fooling yourself, kid. Get over yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, in a different kind of a way, but essentially that's what happens.
Yeah, you're just being a little bit blunter about it. But Molly, at where we are now, is frankly one of the more tragic characters, just because, like Harry, she goes through some shit, and it's in part due to what Harry goes through that causes her to go through some shit, and her just trying to deal with the fallout of it leads her to falling into more shit. And I'm using shit way too much, but it is ultimately the best way to describe what happens to them. They just fall into the worst scenario and just have to make do with it, which I guess is just a metaphor for life. Sometimes you just fall into the worst scenario possible, and you just got to find a way through. You got to be clever about it.
And that's why I ultimately appreciate this series, John, is not only from what you just aforementioned, but also the fact that Dresden has to walk this tightrope of wanting people to be close to him, and also with the highest stakes that he deals with on almost feels like a daily basis, or at least a bookly basis, the things he deals with, it's the more people get close to him, the more they get hurt or things happen to them to put themselves in precarious situations, like we just talked about the aforementioned Molly Carpenter. And so he always has to walk this tightrope, and it's something I greatly appreciate about how Butcher writes Dresden's character. It's this yearning for intimacy, this yearning of having not just intimacy meaning sex, this intimacy of having these people around you, these close people who understand you, who get you, you can laugh with, cry with, hold, talk shit with, have a beer with, have lunch with. It's wanting to have that, but understanding that with great power comes great responsibility.
Indeed. Now, Anthony, I think we've given our listeners a pretty concise summary of the Dresden Files So I would ask all our listeners, read or listen to the books. They're highly recommended by us. They're some of our favorite books out there right now. And also in the near future, once Anthony and I get through both books, I think we're going to be doing a pretty in-depth book club, the Ludic book club here on the Ludic Lounge cast.
The Ludic Library.
Yeah, there we go. Ludic Library. I forgot the name, but Anthony is here to save my bacon once again, as he always does. We will do a combo review discussion on Peace Talks and Battlegrounds, and where it leads our notable wizard detective, and where we expect it to go, and who we miss along the way once the chips fall down. Because I get the feeling some bodies are going to hit the ground.
Yeah, and ultimately, if there's something out there to you, our gentle, loyal listeners, if you want us, because as you know, if you're listening to this, you probably know that we do the Columbo Files, and that we intimately go into each and every Columbo episode, and we talk about the plot, and we talk about the characters. We're going to rank the episodes very soon that we watch the first season, and if that's something you want us to do with the Dresden Files, I would absolutely love that. I would absolutely have to cut way more time into doing that, but but let us know. Let us know if maybe you want us, if you're unsure about wanting to read and or listen to these, and you just want us to test the waters with the first one. Let us know. Reach out to us on Twitter. Reach out to us via email, and let us know, man. But ultimately, as John said, read these books, get the audiobooks, go out there, get yourself learned on the Dresden Files.
Indeedy. Anthony, what have you been up to this week? Anything interesting?
I wish I could sit here and say I've been playing very interesting things, or reading interesting things, or doing anything interesting, but unfortunately, John, this new job's kicking my ass. So I haven't been doing too many new, great, and wonderful things. I think I've played a few hours worth of video games, but nothing very substantial.
Yeah, I'm still knee deep into Squadrons, which I believe I've already said this when I talked about PlayStation VR last episode. VR, honestly, I think is the only way to play Star Wars Squadrons.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking.
And you showed me not too long ago a pretty awesome 3D rig that recreated the proper flight controls for the respective starfighters.
Absolutely. I came across that and instantly thought of you and was like, holy shit.
And honestly, dude, you fucking need them. Because I would be desperate to have that.
Absolutely.
To be quite frank, because just doing it on the controller, and on top of the VR, it feels weird because I look down and I just expect the joystick should be right there and my hand's on the throttle. I know my hand's on the throttle,
right?
But it's not.
There's that disconnect, that cognitive disconnect between what I'm seeing and what's actually in front.
And boy, it's weird, dude. It's really weird.
I believe it, man.
I would also recommend. I'm also reading. It's a kind of a reread because I've only read the first 3 volumes, but you know how I read comics, Anthony. I sometimes read manga.
That is correct, John. What have you been diving into?
I've been diving into a series called Monster by Naoki Urasawa. Now, I think I've talked about Urasawa before because he wrote and drew this this manga called Pluto, which is an adaptation of an Astro Boy story. So it's an Astro Boy story turned into a murder mystery.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, and it's one of the best things I've ever read, and it made me cry.
Wow.
His art is phenomenal at conveying emotion, and there's a moment in Pluto where there's a set of parents just talking to this robot boy and treating him with such compassion and human care that they're treating this robot as if it was their own son,
right? And
it's just I was not expecting it, and then it just came upon me like a like a ton of bricks,
Oh,
and then
Jesus, John, just you describing that, like I can feel my heart going in my fucking throat.
and I honestly, I did not do this scene any justice, none at all. So I would highly recommend Pluto. I'd also recommend the original story from Astro Boy because it's old. It's also a little racist just because there's caricature,
Right.
but it's still it's right up there with Pluto, but Pluto does a completely different thing. Monster also completely different from either Pluto or Astro Boy, where it's a psychological thriller, um, where you follow this Japanese surgeon who lives in Germany, who gets tired of playing the politics of the hospital system. He's dating his boss's daughter, and his boss is the director of the hospital, who can then put him in a position to advance his career. So he's just kind of doing everything as a yes man and doing all the research and letting the future father-in-law take all the credit. And he finally gets tired of it and getting tired of being pulled off of helping the average person to being pulled off to do a complicated brain surgery for the mayor of the town, just because it would give the hospital more clout.
Right.
And he says, fuck that. I'm not doing that. That's not, the first edict of my profession is do no harm, save lives. So I don't care that it's the mayor of the fucking city. There's a 10-year-old boy who got shot in the head and he needs brain surgery. I'm going to do that.
Right.
Turns out that 10-year-old is a sociopath.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. So it becomes this decade-long saga where he learns that the boy he saved turned out to be a monster. And now he has to try and make it right. So it's a complicated web between the people that the boy Johann comes across and is influencing, between the people that Tenma, the surgeon who saved him and is now being blamed for everything that Johann did.
Oh, that's messed up.
Yeah, it's fucked up. It's Tenma trying to figure out where the next step is to find Johann. It's trying to protect Johann's twin sister, who is also trying to find her brother and do the same thing that Tenma wants to do, kill him. So it's a race against time, but it's also a deep character analysis on individuals and what they do to each other just because of their own greed, their own shame, their own frustrations.
Right.
It's a completed series. It's 9 large volumes now. It was one of those that was like released in smaller, like 200-page volumes, and now they had re-released it in larger collections. So it's 9 books essentially. I've read the first 3. I have the rest. I haven't gotten to them yet. So I'm diving into 4 and on. But that's something knew that I've been doing that I wanted to, talk about, because it's me and I talk about books all the damn time.
Now, John, thank you for sharing that, because it triggered one of the things that I did watch that I recommended to you, but I want to recommend to our loyal listeners.
Yes.
Over this past weekend, I watched it was on YouTube for free, and I happened upon it on gentle happenstance. And it's called Tai Chi Zero. And it was one of those, I was watching something with a friend right before it, and I was watching like the spoof of a really crappy, like not even a B movie, and this rolled right after it. And John, when I say this was literally the most creatively shot movie I have watched in a very long time, I mean it from the bottom of my cold, cold heart. It's as if, you know how Scott Pilgrim had those awesome like graphics where they would like cut like manga or comic book scenes into certain things.
Yeah.
And the scenes, you're like, oh, that's kind of quirky. That works. This does something very similar, but it revolves around Kung Fu.
Okay.
And I don't want to give up too much of this because it is free and it is on YouTube, and I want everybody to go watch it. But it's as if you took a more serious Scott Pilgrim, put it in this kung fu movie that revolves around Central Asia and, circa the 1890s, early 1900s, and said, go. And this movie doesn't take you in directions you thought it would. You thought it revolves around a specific character and a specific story arc, and then it doesn't. And it literally, I left this movie ended on a cliffhanger with me going, there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more to this. Yeah, and literally it's on free. It is on YouTube for free. It is fantastic. It's creative. It's got some of the best special effects and art in general that I've seen in a long time. It's got a very captivating story with a very captivating cast of characters. So just go watch it. Everybody just go watch it. I give it 17 thumbs up. Just go. Go right now. If you're listening to this, stop this podcast and go right now and watch Tai Chi Zero on YouTube. Just do it.
I mean, I've been looking for a good kung fu movie.
Watch this movie, goddammit, John. It's free on YouTube. I don't remember how long it was, maybe a couple hours tops. But
I mean, I'm looking at it right now, and it's about 90 minutes. So, I mean, you could just listen to an episode of the Ludic Loungecast, folks, and then go watch Tai Chi Zero, and then don't forget, email us, and then we'll talk about it.
Or just DM us on Twitter, or just at us on Twitter. Any one of those. Just watch this goddamn movie, everybody.
Yeah, our DMs are open. We're sloppy like that.
Yes, we are.
I just found the title of this episode.
Yeah, I think that works, man. I ultimately think that works.
It'll be like the colon. It's just like, filing with the Dresden Files, colon. We're sloppy like that.
And you know what? That kind of revolves around Dresden Files too, so it's funny. Yeah. It works.
Harry is that sloppy.
Now, John, speaking of things that are sloppy, we're going to try to sloppily end this podcast, and we're going to do it as the way you only know how, with your sweet, sultry tones.
I will keep it as sloppy as I can. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to another episode of the Ludic Loungecast. On behalf of my podcast brother, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV, I have been John Soares, and I would just like to say, thank you for lounging with us.
Bye!
Hello, good citizens of Gotham City. This is TV's Batman, Adam West. You have been listening to the Ludic Loungecast! For more, be sure to follow us on Twitter, at Ludic Lounge, for Antonicus, at RojoLoco44, and John, at just_John_0891, or feel free to email us at theludiclounge@gmail.com. Quick, Robin, to the Bat Pulse. We have a podcast to listen to!